Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Welcome to episode 184 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is Katie Hooper, the CEO of the creative brand studio Notorious111. Katie has previously worked for Ralph Lauren and HC before becoming part owner and CEO at Notorious111. We spoke about the rebrand of Notorious111, how to serve existing clients while moving forward as a brand, leadership, the difference in running a business versus owning one, Katie's passion for sports, and much more. Katie Hooper, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on the show. We just mentioned here it's the day after Super Bowl Sunday. So how are you feeling today?
Having a case of the Mondays, right, to play off of one of the campaigns. But I am a unabashed Philadelphia sports fan. So it's a fun day. It's on the heels of it. And it's gotten me thinking in all different ways about brand. Actually, it's sort of like the best example of brand is sports in so many ways. So I appreciate the conversation, hot on the heels.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. Thank you for jumping on. And you work, as you said, a lot with brand and branding. You're currently the CEO of Notorious111. So can you talk a little bit about this role and the company and the creative brand studio? So what you're doing there?
Yeah. So basically, it's been a really interesting journey. And I've been a part of this agency, right? So sort of a traditional integrated advertising agency, if you will, for the last 15 years or so when we were under the name HZ in honor of the founders of the agency. And the journey really, the short version is the founders made a decision to sell the company to WPP. And we were acquired by a PR agency, which is now known as Burson Global. And there was a vision to really stop sort of being so precious about comms agency needs versus creative. Social's always been an overlap. You know, the gray area has collapsed, and we just wanted to offer really smart creative services regardless of the platform or the target audience. I think the challenge is that the comms audience maybe wasn't quite there in terms of looking to disrupt in a responsible way as it pertains to brand, and they were more about protecting brands and making sure that reputation was a primary concern, which is super understandable. So ultimately, we made the decision to divest essentially from WPP and move away from Burson, which was an amazing opportunity and one that we didn't necessarily forecast. But once we were presented with the opportunity, we felt like it made the most sense for us. So the better part of the last 10 months has been an exercise in figuring out who we want to be as an agency when we grow up. And a lot of that is lots of different conversations and looking at the marketplace. And just, I guess, it could be this point in my career as well, but I feel sort of a moral and ethical responsibility to not contribute to more noise in the world in this particular moment. And I think there's a lot of marketers, and I understand why, that are sort of checking the box around just getting something out that's good enough feels like an accomplishment, and oftentimes feels like you're swimming upstream even to do that alone. What we're trying to do is we repositioned ourselves as a creative brand studio. We've renamed ourselves and completely rebranded ourselves as Notorious111 because what we're doing is sort of inviting our partners to collaboratively be more confident that we can put great work out there that resonates and that matters and that people will actually care about without exposing ourselves to being canceled or to risk. There's all sorts of ways that we've figured out how to go do that. So the other sort of big point is that there's 14,000 agencies, which is like shocking when I started to look into it. So the market is very saturated. And there's 14,000 agencies exactly like we were. So everybody's trying to figure out a new way to say integrated creative agency because it's sort of not as productive to be, a jack of all trades, master of none, if you will. So what we started to say was, okay, there's 14,000 agencies. We have an advantage just based off the fact that it happens to be the 5 of us who founded the agency are women. So less than 1% of agencies of those 14,000 are owned by women. And then when you start to factor in the fact that just naturally, this is our leadership team that has been a part of the journey over the course of the last 15 years for the most part, we have just an inherent different perspective on how we see the world, just as people, as humans operating through the agency or through the world rather. So we started to explore what would happen if we completely pivoted our creative position. And the first thing we did after we acquired the agency was we hired a new chief creative officer named Brandon Roshan. And Brandon has been in many amazing places and he has led the charge. And he's really a creative visionary beyond anything that we had ever had before. And collectively, what he started to do was ask us to ask ourselves what it means to have a brand that actually makes a radical positive impact. And so the idea behind Notorious is really, people have an inherent reaction to the word notorious, and some people think of it negatively, like, mafia figureheads and sort of notorious in a bad way. And what we're trying to do is invite people to never take anything at face value. And so we're looking to say, why couldn't Mr. Rogers be notorious for kindness? Or why couldn't Rosa Parks be notorious for bravery? And just don't settle, basically. Ask yourself about sort of like the idea of words and visuals, and you have a reaction to them. But what if we start to explore and play and see what we can do when we start to reinvent ideas? And then ultimately where we landed was we wanted to work with brands that want to be truly known for something. So that's the idea behind Notorious. How do we find the type of partners that aren't just looking to contribute volume and scale and eyeballs and clicks, which are important metrics, but we actually feel like we have an approach to help really crack those brands open and resonate in a way that perhaps we're not seeing our competition is able to do it. And then the 111 aspect is because we were approached with this opportunity on January 11th. And that has been a meaningful number for us as we've continued to sort of go throughout this process. But that was how we landed on sort of the overall, not just brand, but also our intention in the world to work with brands who really want to be truly known.
Wow, that's incredible. And I know you mentioned the five women, the founders, and it's a unique story for this agency. You value diversity a lot. I know that's something that works a lot. Why do you think that's so important?
Yeah. Again, I almost hesitate to even say we're all women and that should be something that we're paying attention to. It was shocking to me that only 1% or less than 1% are women. It also happens to be that 4 of the 5 of us are people of culture representing all different backgrounds and backdrops and lived experiences. And so I'm watching this, as we've relaunched this, we're watching DEI initiatives crumble across the world and certainly political pressures and context that comes into play. And I've been asked the question, are you planning on sort of deprioritizing that as your talk track? And what I've said is it's never been a talk track. That is literally authentically who we are as a leadership team. And so it wasn't methodical. We didn't think to ourselves, how are we going to create a team that gives us the best view? But that's just the team we had inherently. So for us, it's as natural as breathing, is this ability to have lived context from all different kinds of people, all different ages, all different backdrops. And I think that gives us a unique advantage because we have an immediate varied perspective on all kinds of people, and we're looking to connect with all kinds of people. So I think, A, that's critically important. We just have a lived experience that is varied, and B, it's not fabricated. And C, I think it's really important that all kinds of people look up at teams like this and see themselves in some capacity. And that's not just looking at somebody like me, that's looking at all kinds of people. So, it wasn't purposeful. It was just who we were. But I do think it does give us an advantage to continuing to build a more cohesive, diverse team. But also to provide the kind of perspective that all these marketers need, our partners, in order to be able to understand the audiences they're really talking to.
Yeah, definitely. And there are so many studies that diverse teams perform better. And as you said, that you built this not by looking out to hire different, that this is how it became. That's really incredible as well. I'm thinking about also like the industry at large. You mentioned before that so many agencies, they put out, their creative work and that is good enough. And it's such a fast-paced world we live in now and so much impressions that we get every day. So how can you, when you said like, how do you get that patience and to really work through a project and publish it when you think that it's great instead of just pushing something out that's good enough?
Yeah. It's a really good question, and I think it's an ongoing challenge and evolution, and it also depends on the partners we're working with and our clients. Um, I think it's been interesting too to see what's happening with the holding companies and, the consolidation and the continuous M&A, and having been in that experience, I actually think we're talking to two different markets. So when you talk about clients that are right for holding company kind of environments, that's an entire market that I believe in. So when you're talking about great amounts of volume, looking to partner with agencies that have invested millions and millions of dollars against AI and data and analytics and media, the efficiencies you can get off of media. I think those are prime for holding company agencies, and there's a ton of amazing ones. Um, I think the market we're in is more about building, and a lot of agencies say this, but I hate to say but I mean it. We mean it. Um, Building trust and relationships with our clients in a very personal way, to the point where we're trying to empower them to feel good and confident about being more decisive and more stand out around the work that they're doing. And that requires a lot of relationship and a lot of patience, a lot of relationship building and a lot of patience. But we also have an approach and a methodology. So we feel like we've been through this, we've crafted this many times: strategic innovation sessions, initial strategy sessions, discovery sessions, tissue sessions. They're called all different things in our industry. But what we do is we start every engagement with what we call a giant leap. And a giant leap session is called that quite specifically because the distance you go from the time you walk in the morning as our partner till when you leave, when the day is through, is giant. And we have a very specific methodology that we take our clients through. It's really fun. It's really disarming. And it's almost like choose your own adventure, if you will. We pose a series of questions and we take them on a journey, and we ask them to think like the brand, not like Marcus would think or like Katie would think, but like, how would you make this decision as a brand? And then through this exercise, and it's often the conversations in between, even more so than the answers, what we end up walking out with is a true, what I would call strategic DNA, the footprint of the agency, of the brand rather, and exactly what they can stand for. So we see through this process that the stakeholders of the brand are themselves kind of beating it up in the room. And so by the time we walk out, everybody feels aligned. We understand how it is that we can differentiate ourselves in the brand, in the context of the industry, if you will. And we also understand the difference between brand versus business. And we unpack both. Both are important, but this conversation is really solely focused about brand. So this giant leap session has you walking out with what you would say is the strategic DNA of your brand and what you can stand for and how you operate throughout the world. And then very quickly, we walk into something called vision and vibe. And that exercise has us taking sort of that architecture of what the brand can stand for. And then we create the entire brand world that it could live in. And that's a complete, curated, bespoke experience for every single one of our clients, because it really depends on what they're looking to accomplish and what they can stand for. So an example might be, if we have a new brand where we're building from scratch something, that vision and vibe is going to be very heavy on name and identity and logo, and start to express perhaps how they might launch themselves and come to market. There could be some campaign work in there. What does the product look like? If it's somebody that we worked with, for example, the Washington Nationals, they're an established brand. They just needed to figure out a different way to be able to tell their story in a really crowded marketplace when the team isn't necessarily bringing in the numbers based on the wins and losses on the field. So that exploration looks incredibly different, and we start to unpack what brand assets exist and how we can maybe think about them a little bit differently. So that's the true. I mean, bespoke also feels like a little bit of an overused word, but that's the experience. We have a process that's consistent, but the work that comes out of it is completely custom depending on what that brand and business need.
That's really interesting. So how important is it that the brand you're working with share your values? Maybe if we talk about diversity, or it could be like maybe you have a very strong environmental strategy for something like that. If a brand does like their work is not kind of matching your values, is that something that is an issue, or do you work with them anyway and just promote like their brand from the best light, so to speak?
So I love that question because that too is a little bit of a squishy conversation on an ongoing basis, because everybody that I've worked with has a perspective of quote unquote doing good for the world versus maybe has an underbelly that you don't really want to engage in. For the most part, the good news is we don't really face those conversations too frequently, but I have 2 points to make. One is because when we changed our name, we were an existing agency, right? So we have a significant book of business with clients that we've worked with for years, like BW, like Kawasaki, really, sound, great partners. And we did have a couple of clients come to us and say, we're concerned that you've changed your name to Notorious 111. Does that mean you're going to take us to the edge? Does that mean you're going to take our conservative brand and you're going to make it feel edgy? Are you going to make it feel like your website? We said, we love this conversation because no, that's the exact opposite of what we're looking to do. We're not looking to replicate, 50 versions of the Notorious 111 brand. We're looking to make it really clear that understanding culture and context and where people are operating is important, but we need to understand what makes your brand you. And so for us to sort of look to project our own values onto each of the brands would kind of be counter to what it is that we're talking about, which is creating a whole bunch of uniqueness as opposed to a whole lot of sameness. So that was a really interesting output when we changed our name that maybe we didn't really expect, but you don't really know what to expect when you go into this Wild West. But it was a thought-provoking conversation. The other point, which I think is more what you were asking, is how do we navigate the landscape of brands potentially that want to work with us that maybe conflict with our own values as an agency? And I think, again, that becomes a very human conversation with the leadership and the growth teams where we say, how do we feel about this particular brand and what it is they're looking to accomplish? Because we have a stated vision as an agency of creating radical positive impact. And the reason we like that is because that holds a lot of space for a lot of answers, right? Positive impact could be a really cool product has been invented and it needs to be brought to the market. Positive impact could be we're trying to help business grow because they can hire more people and they can do more things and we feel really, good about it. Positive impact could be something for climate. It could be something for purpose. There's a lot of room under there. But I think so far what we haven't seen is conflicts around brands that we're sort of iffy about, but we would actively have that discussion because I think at the end of the day, probably a lot of us who have been doing this for a long time just always took the assignment. We didn't put a whole lot of thought into, do we feel good about this or not? Because that's just been the mentality. But I do think that it's the right time to have those conversations because ultimately we're a team of humans. So we need everybody to feel like we're behind the work that we're doing for all sorts of reasons.
You mentioned a lot of positive change, but you said that your goal is radical positive change. Is there a difference?
I think the themes you hear from us are more than just status quo. So we purposefully added the word radical on there because we do not want to just create more stuff to say we did. Part of this exploration was me having lots of conversations with marketers I know all across the globe and asking them what they're not getting from their partners. What do you feel like you wish you had from your agencies? And one answer I hear all the time is agility. Like, I just want them to move faster, which we hear you, working towards that as fast as possible. But the other thing I heard was, I was asking one of my good friends at a Fortune 100 company who was working on an ad campaign with their big holding company agency. And I said, how do you feel about the creative? And she was like, it's okay. And I thought, nobody should have that. Literally, nobody should have it. You're talking about millions of dollars of not just money, but like heart and soul. And you're talking about creatives and you want something to be great. And so I just felt like the notion of positive impact wasn't specific enough. And we did this as a leadership team. So like collectively, we just felt like we had to keep sharpening and narrowing to the point where we will make and do anything. We have an entire creative studio that can make anything happen. But what we're looking to find are the kinds of partners that are looking to leave their campsite a little better than they found it. And the more we can do that, I feel that sort of aligns with what our vision is.
I love that. So I read somewhere when I did some research that you said that you're just getting started. You have done the rebrand. You have been in the industry for quite some time, but now with Notorious 111, with the rebrand, how do you see the future? What are your goals now going forward?
Yeah. So it's interesting and we can talk more about this. We really didn't know what we were getting ourselves into, right? Like running a company is very different, it turns out, than owning a company. And sometimes you just don't know until you're doing it. I'm sure you know this, even from launching a podcast. You're like, this is going to be great. And then you start to figure it out along the way. I think the reason I feel like we're just getting started is twofold. Number one, last year was enormously disruptive to us, the agency as an ecosystem, right? First of all, the last 5 years have been enormously disruptive to all people everywhere from a work and a culture standpoint. So, in addition to the fact that we started 2024 thinking we were going to close the agency, and 11 days into 2024, we decided we're going to buy the agency. And then 3 months later, we bought it. And then we spent the next 9 months kind of figuring out what that meant, right? So I keep describing it as we had this like amazing sports car already. And then the last 9 months, it was careening out of control. And we spent 9 months just getting control of it. And then we're like, cool, where do we want to go? Where do we want to go? And that's what 2025 for us is really all about. We wanted to make sure our existing portfolio felt really good about where we were going and what our intentions were. Our talent felt really good and understood the mission that we're all collectively on. But it was harder in a way to start a business that existed versus starting it from scratch. Because what you have to do is, ask all these people who are showing up very earnestly to service their clients and do great creative work to now take on a totally new identity that we hadn't even yet built. So we figured out, I think, pretty successfully and quickly all the sort of elements to who we wanted to be in 2024 while continuing to improve what we were delivering to our clients. So this year, very sort of psychologically and physically, I can't tell you how much I appreciated tearing off December 2024 and embracing January 2025, because this is the first time in a long time that we actually get to plan proactively from an agency standpoint. Okay, how are we going to go about our growth cycle? How are we going to go about our talent development? How are we going to go about promoting our brand so that we have more at bats to be able to do what it is that we want to do? And there's no playbook for this, right? So it's just continuing to learn as we're going. And I do think, collectively, one thing we've all talked about for years is embracing a growth mindset. And that's exactly what this feels like. It feels like we are just starting an entire endeavor, and we've learned so much. And how do we, for the first time, really, as founders and as owners, get to map where we want to go from here? And acknowledging every mistake, every pitfall is just going to have us come back and learn a little bit more and be able to apply it. So it's more of I would say, a psychological thing. But again, I think it is also, as you pointed out, I think you said it nicer, but I'm old and I've been doing this for a long time, and everything I have felt like is a chapter in the learning curve. Um, and I just feel like now I finally have enough of a picture of all of it to be able to figure out how to navigate it.
That's really interesting. I like that. And great to hear now that 2025, you ripped off the band-aid of 24 and now starting fresh.
We said
Love it.
goodbye. We thanked it for its service. We Marie Kondoed it, and we are moving into 2025.
Yeah, perfect. So I assume you work with brands in several fields. But this is the sports management podcast. So if we focus on the sports industry, is there something, specific that you need to take into consideration, or some maybe hurdles or difficulties or something that is just way better or greater from your work in the sports industry specifically?
Yeah. So my team will laugh at all of this because I'm annoyingly passionate about sports, probably. Again, Philadelphia fans, speaking of brand, are notorious for being very obsessed with our sports teams. So I think for me, sports is one of my most favorite industries that I've worked on. And we just happen to have constantly had a foothold in sports and entertainment throughout the entire time I've been at this agency. I also was an athlete and still consider myself to be an athlete, although like what's the Peloton version of the athlete, I guess, right? Like I still try to engage as much in competitiveness as I can. But I was a college athlete. I played field hockey and lacrosse. I was the captains of my field hockey and lacrosse teams in high school and my field hockey team in college. And so I've always had an inherent understanding of competitiveness, of the importance of coaches, leadership as it pertains to sort of when you're terrible, your season's awful, how important leadership is. When your season's great, how important leadership is. And when I came to HZ, which was who we were before we were Notorious111, we had an opportunity to pitch and ultimately win Penn State football. And this was a long time ago. And I think it's a great story for us because we still see it was in essence the first really amazing brand that we were able to really do what we're talking about now. So we were able to create an entire brand platform that still today, 10 years later after we launched it, is now core and inherent to the entire Penn State athletics program. So much so that it was referenced on Pat McAfee when he was there during the college football playoff. So it's very inherent to their brand. And what it taught me when we were there, which I joke, I think I got my master's degree from Penn State because we were there so frequently. But what it taught me was that every single every single fan base thinks they're the most special. It doesn't matter what it is, D1, D3, pro, small market, large market. That's kind of the beauty, I think, of sports, is that it is the biggest rallying cry and the biggest bond for a community. And it really has the ability to either build or make people incredibly angry if their team is not doing well. So I think what was hard and also ultimately so rewarding about that was Penn State football has a heritage, it has a history. It was obviously known for Joe Paterno, and then it was known for a scandal, and then it's been known for rebuilding ever since. And we were able to talk to and engage with as many fans and as many team members and as many staff as possible in order to land on this idea of what we ultimately called Unrivaled. And the idea worked for Penn State football where it wouldn't work anywhere else because the experience of attending a Penn State football game in the winter during a whiteout is unrivaled. It's not like the stadium's great. It's not like the product could be good or not good, but the experience and the energy that you get from attending a game or from watching that game on television is unlike anything else. And so I think the magic of something like sports is when you really understand the mindset of the fan, when you really understand the context of the market they operate in, and you get the heart of what the team leadership and the staff are looking to communicate, it's super personal. It's super personal to be able to come up with something that really hits in the right way. So that then led to multiple other engagements. We worked on the Philadelphia Eagles, which was, I should have just retired. It was a highlight. We did a lot of work for the Washington Commanders. I mentioned we do work for the Washington Nationals. We do a lot of work with Monumental Sports and Entertainment and their various properties. And it just became something that I think collectively we really enjoyed working on, but we also appreciated it was interesting to work on the Eagles at the same time as the Commanders back in the day because, rivals, but also you can do that when you're working on sports because you're talking to a totally different community of fans than, they do not cross. Let's just say that. So it's been a place where we've consistently built really successful engagements with our partners, whether it was, very specific for the Commanders back in the day. It was more about building sponsor packages and entire experiences for those sponsorships. And for the Eagles, it was about the ad campaigns to get people more excited about them than the Phillies, because this was back when the Phillies were better than the Eagles. So every sort of challenge is different, but it's more personal through the lens of, I would say, brand and reputation, usually, than it is to just like butts and seats and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, sports have that, right? That it brings out emotions and people really, put their whole heart in something, in a team or in a player. And then I feel like it's more emotional in that way from fans than in most other industries.
I totally agree. I mean, again, just because it's so current, watching the Super Bowl last night was a total trifecta experience for me, right? On one hand, I'm like quieting everybody so I can watch the ads like a dork. And so I have an opinion about those, right? And then watching a game as a fan is an incredibly physical experience because you feel so nervous for your team, which is like crazy, I know. And then my favorite ad, but I think only the Eagles fans would appreciate this uniquely, was Jordan ran an ad at the very end. I don't know if you saw it, but Jordan ran an ad and it was specifically about Jalen Hurts because if you follow the team, you feel invested in these people and these players. Again, unique to sports versus any other brand industry that you're talking about. And we all kind of feel like we've been on this journey. It's almost like a Netflix series every season, right? Like you're on a journey and this theme is that. And this ad so beautifully encapsulated that challenge that he had been on. And it just was so good. So that's what is so different, I think, about sports quite regularly versus any other industry that you work on. Not to say it doesn't exist, but in every sports story, it feels like you're invested. You feel like you know these people and you feel like you care about what the outcome is. And that's hard to hit the right brand message in that respect, but also incredibly personal at the same time.
Definitely. I would like to talk about leadership as well. You mentioned that you were the team captain in your college sports. And, being, as we talked about before, running a company, owning a company, being in, executive positions. How would you describe your leadership style and how do you think it has evolved over the years?
So it's a good question. I think I have this thing that I've had since I was a teenager because I babysat and I worked in retail stores. I've always had a work mentality. And I have also always thought I was getting fired, like no matter what. I felt like I went into this, whatever the job is, thinking I have to be better and better and better. So I have drive that definitely I just have. And it's part of, I feel like, what I've had since I was young. But I think also part of that is because I have always been as honest as I can be. And I think a lot of people say that, but I've witnessed a lot of different high-level executives not practicing that. Ultimately, they prefer the comfort and I think the security of being liked by their bosses, perhaps, as opposed to helping them to talk truth, which can be incredibly career limiting. Right? Like we work with a lot of wealthy, smart executives and clients who aren't used to being told they can't have something or their idea is not a great idea. So I think what I've honed over time and probably wasn't great at the beginning of my career and improved, hopefully, as I continue to have more experience, is there is an art to communicating with really smart, high-powered, very creative people in a way that doesn't make them feel belittled. It doesn't make them feel less than. It makes them feel heard. And yet they know they're going to get the real from you. And so I've always sort of treated every engagement I've had, whether, when I was at Ralph Lauren, my like ultimate boss was David Lauren, who oversaw all of marketing for the entire company. And he was like a very innovative, entrepreneurial creative who was 10 ideas ahead of me at any given time. But I learned how to communicate. I was young. I mean, I was new in my career at that point. I was 25. And so it was intimidating to walk into the famous Lauren family executive wing and try to explain to this very innovative creative why we couldn't get gold-plated poker sets for the rugby brand because it was a startup. So you're talking to somebody who's been living literally the life of a brand his whole entire life since he was born, and how to figure out how to advance and get things done that I knew were right for the business. This particular business that we were working on with somebody who maybe wasn't as close to it was hard. So anyway, my approach has always been be as honest as possible, try to back it up with as much rationale and pragmatism as possible, but also understand that there are egos involved in many of the conversations that we're having on a regular basis. So you need to be mindful of how to get something done, basically, that you believe in, but in a way that brings everybody with you. So I think that's more probably my style generally. Now, as it pertains to sort of leading a team, Um, my goal is to surround myself with people 200 times smarter than me across every single skill set and bulldoze everything out of the way in order for them to be successful in what it is that they need to get done. So in my mind, if you're on my team and you're in charge of growth, I will support and lead and do whatever you need me to do, but like you get to decide for better or for worse where it is we're going because you've shown me that you're capable of doing it. Likewise, with Brandon coming on board, he gets to decide. He gets to decide creative, he gets to help. Now we all get to collaborate and we facilitate that very purposefully, but I need people that are so much smarter and know way more things than I do so that I can kind of like look at all the pieces and figure out how to put them all into the best place possible. That's my goal. And I also admit I like to be liked. This is probably something I'm working on a consistent basis because you're not always like delivering the most favorite news to everybody when you're in this position. And that's a work in progress for me because I don't like to make people feel bad. But we also have to be accountable for a business and for a broader community that we're building. So that's probably a gap that I'm continuing to work on.
That's interesting because you say that you're telling the truth and you're very straightforward, and then usually that then you will clash sometimes, right? So then you might be disliked. So to have both of those and to balance those is an interesting dynamic, I think.
It's challenging. I mean, I'll use even when we were going through the naming of the agency as an example. We were, as a leadership team, we were split right down the middle. We had truly like three people liked Notorious, and the other name that we were deciding between was 111, and they were separated at the time. And it was emotional. I mean, I know, and it's helpful for us to counsel our clients when they're going through name changes and rebrands because it's hard. And at the end of the day, you never get alignment. You really never get alignment. So the conversation then shifted for me with good counsel from my teammates to like, you need to decide. That's the role is you have to tie break it and you have to just keep us moving forward regardless of how people feel about it. And I was like, oh, this is not I'm itchy. This is not my jam. But I embraced it because ultimately, for a lot of different reasons, we ended up putting the names together, but that was not to split the baby. That was just a strategic move that we came to. But as soon as we decided, everybody was cool. So part of that lesson for me is like, even in the moment when those debates are occurring and you're getting a lot of heat one way or the other, you know that you're almost never going to gain alignment on everything 100% in this world, especially. And so sometimes you just have to like make the decision and keep it moving along. And even if people, feel a certain way about it, that's the gig.
Hurdles will come, right? And I usually ask that. So has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yeah. Yes, daily. It's interesting. Part of my process, I think, is I'll have a week where I'm just like, what is happening? I'm trying to ingest all the things. I can't quite figure out what to do with all the information I'm getting. And then I try to give it a little bit of grace and space, right? So I'm big on don't make an urgent decision unless you have to make an urgent decision because sometimes you need that contemplation. Honestly, like back to my competitiveness as an athlete today, I need the 5-mile run in the morning to be able to sometimes let the pieces fall together. And so I think one of the big hurdles in general has been just understanding how to build a brand new vision, as I mentioned at the beginning, while continuing to service the clients that we have as successfully as possible. And I think the people part has been the biggest hurdle because you're talking about a group of employees, especially with our agency, that a lot of them have been there for a long time. They've been incredibly earnest, heartfelt, dedicated employees. And it's been really, really hard to convince them to see the company differently when they continue to show up at the same building every single day. And we just peeled off a sticker and we put on a new sticker. So that's been a work in progress. I think one view I have into the experience of being acquired, at the time there were founders there and then the founders left. And then they asked us if we would take over just the stewardship of the agency. And then going through that process, really, I could have looked at that like it was a debacle because it was really hard. And I never felt like we had control of our destiny. And I felt like decisions were being made that weren't in the best interest of the agency and the people, or the work. But in hindsight, I feel like I had to go through that experience in order to understand, A, the fidelity of how to run a really good business, and to help us clarify what we want to be and what we don't want to be. Versus just, again, back to that we like to be liked thing, or I like to be liked thing. Like, we want to say yes to everybody. This is the number one agency challenge. It's really hard for agency people to say that they can't do that or they won't do that. So I think what my point is like, I need some perspective to understand the hurdles. Sometimes I didn't even know they were a hurdle until time has passed, and then I can look back at them and start to reframe them and figure out what I learned from it, basically. So I would say collectively, the last 5 years were a hurdle for a million different reasons, but purposeful. And so I can't really think of an example of like a derailing moment, in part because I've always seen what the next thing is, and I've always jumped into it. It's never even been a hesitation from my perspective to figure out whether or not you should take the leap, because what's the worst thing that happens? You totally fail, and then you go start again. You do something and you're better for it, right? So I would say, for many reasons, the last 5 years were a series of hurdles, most of which I could not control. And that's the other thing. It's like, the majority of these hurdles, you're like humming down the street, having a good time, and then you fall into a hole. You didn't even see it. You're just like, whoa, I couldn't have predicted that. How am I going to get out of here? So, all the things is my answer to the last 5 years, especially. Everything else, I think, has felt fortuitous. I can't think of another way. Like, I decided I was going to move to New York, so I just did. And then I kept looking at this little brand that launched at Ralph Lauren that I was interested in, and I found anybody I could, and I ultimately went there. And then I decided I was kind of done with New York and needed a break and wanted to move home to Philly. And, so there's all these sort of stories that have led me to each step. This was the first one where it really felt like how presidents look at the end of a term. They look super old and like haggard. That's how I felt at the end of this last 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy, right? How they look. Like, I saw some before and after of Obama when he just went into office and out of office. It must be a rough job, this one.
I do not envy it.
Me neither. It sounds to me, though, that like you have purpose. That's what you said. Like, you always knew, like you had your Northern Star. So that must be helpful when you're going through hurdles, that you see this goal ahead of you that you're working towards.
Yeah, I guess it's funny because I'm sort of jealous of people who have a very specific purpose, right? Like, I know people I work with, and their purpose is to impact this particular group of people and do this. Or, we work with somebody whose purpose was to open the first synagogue in a certain area, right? Like, there's all these very purpose-oriented people that I'm just like, God, I'm so jealous of that. But I think my purpose is to feel like I'm contributing. I can't, like, I look at, an FBI show on Netflix or something, and I'm like, I should have been in the FBI. I would have felt so good about like what I'm showing up to contribute every single day. But I'm not. I'm scared of things. So it's probably the right industry for me. But I do have a purpose to feel like I contributed at the end of every day. And I think now that I've had kids, and I have 2 sons, and they're 10 and 12, and I've spent a lot of time away from them, as a result of doing as much as I can from my career. But I find it to be hugely rewarding because they're people, and they appreciate what I do too, which impacts my purpose, if you will. So I just have this feeling of wanting, again, maybe it's a sports mentality. I've always had it. I'm super annoying in that I talk in sports analogies all the time to people who do not care about sports at all. But I really do feel like I leave it all out on the field. And I'm easily motivated by coach-like objects who have that kind of wisdom, because it really resonates with me. And that really does feel like my purpose. I'm have a great friend. She's a coach. She's my coach also, but she's become a great friend. And she's like, you don't always have to talk in terms of productivity. Like you don't always have to, sometimes you can just sit. I'm like, I can't even get like a treatment at a spa without feeling like it's working towards healthier skin or me working out better or whatever that looks like. So I do feel this inherent need to just not be a citizen in this crazy world and to, in whatever way I can, whether it's raising two responsible, kind, inclusive sons, who, by the way, will be independent and will not come back and live with me forever and ever, to controlling my own financial destiny. Like these are all the kinds of things that I think drive me.
I like that. With your experience that we talked about from different companies and being in this industry for quite some time, what's some advice that you would give a young person who wants to work in sports or in with at an agency maybe?
Yeah, it's interesting because my niece plays lacrosse at Notre Dame, and she's in marketing and she's interested in doing exactly this, like somehow getting involved in marketing or communications. And I've been talking to her a lot about this specifically because it's hard, by the way. So you have to, I think a lot of people who get into the creative landscape maybe don't really know what it's all about. So my number one piece of advice is if you have any sort of an inclination and you want to do something like this, just get an internship. I know that's easier said than done. And personally speaking, I think going to New York and or a major metropolitan area and working for either a giant company with like a great methodology and a great rigor and a great internship program. Actually, Burson has a great internship program if people are interested more on the PR side. I think is a great way to understand the specificity of what it means to go from the classroom to the world, because there's a very different skill set for a graphic designer than somebody who's dealing with content and social, than a programmer, than an account executive, et cetera, et cetera. So I think those are great experiences for people and or brand side, but I think agency gives you the best breadth of like what's possible. And then I think you just keep going. Like you literally don't say no to anything. Show up. I hate to say this because this sounds like I'm aging myself. Maybe I am. But like, honestly, I think there's something to be the first there, be the last to leave. Ask questions, be curious. How can I help? Yes, I'd love to do that. It's not just because it's cool to burn out. It's because that's curiosity that will serve you and will become a muscle that you will flex your whole entire career and that will never leave you kind of falling down that hole in a really meaningful way. So that would be my biggest thing is like say yes to everything. Aim for things that you're interested in. And if you're in a place where you know you're not interested in it, don't waste time. That's the other thing. Don't waste time for the company that you're in and don't waste time for yourself. Give it like a go and then go find something else that you might be more interested in. I can tell you being client side and nonprofit side and agency side has served me really well because I was able to understand perspective from totally different viewpoints. That I think has made me a more sound marketer overall. I can understand clients because I was one, and I can understand how hard it is to work with startups because I was one. And I think all of that breadth of experience packages you really nicely.
Yeah, I like that. And internships I've talked about many times. And as you mentioned, the many benefits of that as well. And interesting with when you say like to say yes to everything and be the first in and last out, because I feel like there is some type of generational change now on how you look at your work, that it's just a job and you don't want to put too much identity into it. So I think that if you are someone who is curious and driven and you are the first in and last out, you will have a competitive advantage off the bat compared to many of the other people, I think, around you in the similar age.
I think you are right. And I would also say, like, you should surround yourself with all different kinds of people and all kinds of advice and see what works for you, because that is true. That is just inherent to what worked for me and what I look for. I look for, especially in the creative space, like you to do this, because let's just be realistic about it. You are working nights and weekends and then you're cool for a couple weeks. That's the kind of the beauty of working in an agency is it's sort of little feast or famine sometimes. And people thrive on that kind of energy, do really well here. But you have to constantly be like, what if I did this better? Or I'm going to go out to see that museum exhibition because like I'm a naturally curious person. Or why did they put that sign there? It feels like if they did it differently, like there's just an inherent eagerness and curiosity that if you have that, you will thrive in this industry. And I agree, back to the 14,000 agencies, there's a lot of agencies that you could work for that are just looking to like clock in, clock out, make a logo, leave. That's not what we're looking to build. I don't think that's what differentiates great work from good work. And it's not for everybody. In the same way the Navy SEALs is not for everybody. In the same way that, going to RISD is not for everybody. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that. There's all kinds of jobs and careers for people, but to be in a creative agency environment, especially in our world where content is so like rapid and hungry, you have to be like on top of everything all the time because you want to be, not because your boss is telling you to be.
Approaching the end here, is there something I haven't asked you yet that you feel is important to mention?
I mean, I guess it's just, if anything, from my standpoint, I do this because it's ultimately fun. And I think there are so many marketing opportunities in the industry globally. It's really important, I think, and I did not do a great job of this. It just happened this way, to be thoughtful about who you want to be when you grow up. And at the time, for the first 20 years, I was like, it's cool to just go where the universe is telling me to go. And, back to the whole just getting started. This is the first time, I'm 46. This is the first time in my career where I've been forced to decide, am I going this way or am I going this way? And it didn't feel very obvious to me. And there is a mentor who was advising us throughout this process. And she said to us, fortune favors the bold. And that has been the mantra, so far as I'm concerned, for this exercise, but quite frankly, for my whole entire career. It's been, why not? Let's link arms and jump off the cliff, because it's not actually a life or death. We can figure this out. So I just think the more I can encourage people and ideally inspire people to find their curiosity, to actually care about what they're doing because they love it for some reason, and to be unafraid. Like, there's so many things to be afraid of, more and more every day, that this can become this little ecosystem where you get to play and you get to experiment and you get to create and you get to recreate. And I think anybody that doesn't embrace that, it's probably not the right gig. You really have an opportunity to make things in a way that most of us as adults don't have the opportunity to do.
I love that. Katie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
This was super fun. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportmpodcast.